world, we're open on this question of a deal. But remember that one of the preconditions in this interim agreement, what Iran is saying is, all right, we will do this for a while. But 10 years out or whatever the time period, and that hasn't been agreed to yet.
Right, so that's
at that point in time, the deal's off.
The Beltway buzzes. We dig into what's cooking from inside that den of vipers and such. Newsmax White House correspondent John Gizzi joins us today. John, pleasure to see you again, or to hear you again, I should say. Hope you had a good weekend.
Well, that's good. Occasionally we have gremlins come up in the system, and sometimes we have to have victims. I happen to be one, but we're in touch, and that's what's important.
All right, let's talk about the nuclear Iran, if you will. John Kerry is in Vienna, and I guess what a lot of people would ask is anything different going to come out of this meeting that has come out of any of the other several thousand meetings before it?
Well, I know one person who certainly doesn't think so, and he's a player in all of these proceedings, Ed Royce, congressman from California and chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee. He and Eliot Engel, the ranking Democrat on the Foreign Affairs panel, are pushing legislation for even tougher sanctions against the Islamic Republic. Why? Because they have a long history of not telling the truth. Their sister measure in the Senate is the Kirk-Menendez measure, again bipartisan support, and again backed by nearly two-thirds of the senators. What's standing in between tougher sanctions and becoming actual law is the administration. The president has what Chairman Royce calls a zeal for a deal. And this all comes at a time that Hamas is hammering Israel and its dome with missiles. Where do they get them from? Iran. And its leader, who does not speak to politicians, the Ayatollah Khamenei, is someone who wants to eliminate Israel. As Chairman Royce put it, why should we ever deal with someone who invokes rhetoric right out of Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf? This is where it stands now.
Is it not fair to say, though, that we can also ask a question along those same lines? Why should we believe anything that the Iranians tell us? Because as I'm reading it right here, the serious obstacle in this all is whether Iran should have an industrial-scale uranium enrichment capacity, enabling it to be self-sufficient in nuclear fuel for its nuclear power station. It's almost like a rhyme. We hear it anymore because we hear these over and over again. And I'll tell you what, John, there's people sitting on the outside, the American people, who go, we hear the same thing, nothing happens. There's no reason to trust that Iran ever wants to get close to any sort of agreement. Fair to say?
As Chairman Royce put it, just simply look at what happened when we believed North Korea. And they agreed to go along with missile inspection. They agreed to curb their efforts toward weaponization, and before you knew it, they were launching the Dung missiles. Iran has a long history of not telling the truth on this. Chairman Royce believes that they were stalled for years, that they will continue to keep out inspectors up to the point that they join the world's nuclear club and get the respect of a nuclear power on the world stage. And he said we just can't allow that to happen, particularly when they talk about Israel the way they do.
Speaking of truth, is there any reason to believe we are closer to the truth as to what actually happened or what may have happened in the Mississippi race between McDaniel and Cochran?
I have a feeling I'm going to settle in for some long coverage, long after I thought I'd close my files on this, Ed. Chris McDaniel, who lost by nearly 7,000 votes to the 36-year incumbent Thad Cochran, refuses to concede defeat, and he is challenging a number of the votes that Senator Cochran received in their runoff election, saying these people voted in the Democratic primary and were barred from voting in the Republican primary by law. Now, that said, I would normally dismiss this as a sore loser. Believe me, after 35 years, I've seen a lot of them. However, he has sufficient support. The Senate Conservative Fund, a major political action committee on the right, has pumped in a five-figure amount to fund his challenge. Senator Ted Cruz, a respected Republican, raised eyebrows by saying they should investigate fraud if it is there. And so it is not as though he's someone alone crying, I was robbed. And that's why I say it'll be a long time before we get the results, as Senator Cochran at 77 prepares to seek his seventh term.
Couple of minutes we got left here. Interesting. You talked to a political consultant in Massachusetts, and there's an initiative here to repeal a gas tax increase on the November ballot. Tell us about that.
Exactly. And by the way, I hate to turn down your kind offers to be on the air and report, Ed, but in this case, I made the right decision because I've got some news for you today.
Yeah.
By being delinquent on Friday. Let's see if I'm right. The Democratic-dominated Massachusetts legislature passed a $500 million tax package recently, and this included a 3 cent per gallon increase in gasoline. And that's not the bad part. Gas taxes go up all the time. It is linked to inflation. So every time the inflation rises, so does the gas tax. That means a gas tax can go on to infinity and then some. Well, the lady I talked to is a longtime Republican consultant, Holly Robichaud. She gathered a few friends together at her home for Chinese food, and out of it came a resolution to repeal the gas tax and link it to the CPI, Consumer Price Index. Now, by itself, you may say, fine, what are Massachusetts voters going to do? Well, one has required 76,000 signatures to get on the ballot in the Bay State. They got 120,000 signature with an all-volunteer effort. 600 people using their own time without compensation, spending less than $10,000. And guess what? The measure's on the ballot. In the birthplace of the American Revolution and taxation without representation, this is a story to be watched. Americans still don't like taxes.
We never have, just to go ahead and put it that way. Just really a minor thing here. But we don't like gas taxes either. That's okay. And John, by the way, you are forgiven for being delinquent on Friday then, for not being able to be here. That's quite all right. You got that story, so that's good to go.
And stay tuned and read the details in Newsmax.
See, now there you're going. It's the next place I was going. Remind everybody that on Newsmax.com. That's where John Gizzi is. You can read his stuff every single day when we're not here, and he brings us up to speed here a couple of times a week and lets us know what's going inside the Beltway right now. There's a look at the Newsmax website, the way it sits right now. John, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Have a wonderful Monday. We'll talk to you later on this week.
Can't wait. Thank you so much. I'll stay cool.
And you will. We won't, of course, in the South, but you certainly will. Coming up, the Steve Mosberg Show is about ready to come right around the corner from New York City. Steve is talking to a lot of folks as we get ready for the midterms and some exclusive interviews. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more when MidPoint continues right here.